May it please the Court, my name is Catherine Stevenson.
And my name is Camila Gaita.
And we represent the petitioner, Free Speech Coalition, in today's case.
There is one issue before the court, and that is what level of scrutiny should House Bill 1181 be looked under? Strict scrutiny or rational basis? As petitioner, we will argue that HB 1181 should be looked under strict scrutiny for the following three reasons.
First, HB 1181 is unconstitutional.
When strict scrutiny is applied, HB 1181 would fail under two of the three prongs.
And third, if HB 1181 were to be passed, it would create a terrible chilling effect that would affect all parts of speech. Moving to our first point, HB 1181 is unconstitutional for a multitude of reasons. Firstly, pornography is protected regardless of obscenity standards because they are not concrete and should not be applied to today's case. Pornography is speech and expression, and to create a bill that would attack that speech and expression would be unconstitutional. Secondly, HB 1181 is a content-based bill. In order for it to be applied properly, the legislators have to look at the message of the speech or expression, which attacks the First Amendment entirely, making it unconstitutional.
HB 1181 burdens adults' rights. In Ginsburg v. New York, the court's ruling was that minors did not have the right to content that was obscene for them, but that content was not obscene for adults, so girly magazines could still be sold to adults. HB 1181 restricts First Amendment, so strict scrutiny is required. Moving to our second point. When strict scrutiny is applied to HB 1181, it would fail two out of the three prongs. The three prongs of strict scrutiny are that there is a compelling government interest, that the piece of a law is narrowly tailored to that interest, and that it's the least restrictive means to the interest. HB 1181 fails in being narrowly tailored and the least restrictive means to the government's interest of protecting minors. HB 1181 is not narrowly tailored to achieve the government's interests because it is under-inclusive, vague, and overbroad. Search engines are not regulated by HB 1181, and while statutes do not have to cover every aspect of an issue, search engines are a host and gateway to pornography and should be regulated. HB 1181 does not restrict broadcast and television because it's trying to target the sexual content harmful in the internet that is easily accessible to minors, so it should also regulate search engines and social media. The identification requirement is vague as it does not define the methods to verify age, and the statute is overbroad as it regulates over 1/3 of content, so inadvertently it will restrict content that does have value, contrary to the Miller test of obscenity.
Furthermore, HB 1181 is not the least restrictive way of achieving the interest. The bill itself restricts too many rights that did not have to be restricted in the first place. A lesser restrictive means could be guidelines over a mandatory rule so that the burden shifts from minors, adults, and commercial enterprises with over 1/3 of its content being sexual to burdening only the platforms. Guidelines allow for society to slowly shift into what the bill intends for it to do without overly restricting people's rights. Another option, as presented through United States v. Playboy, would be to put the burden entirely on the parents and let them decide what their children can and can't see. Moving to our third point, if HB 1181 were to get passed, it would create a chilling effect that would affect more than the speech that it intended. It would affect platforms that extend beyond pornography websites, and HB 1181 is not prepared to handle all of it. The bill was made specifically for pornography websites, and it never took into account other commercial enterprises like Wattpad and Tumblr that would be affected by this bill and would restrict more speech than necessary.
The court is now open to questions.
What, if any, is the value of low-level speech such as pornography?
All speech has value because of the message it holds. In the context of pornography, it is artistic expression and does hold First Amendment protections. So regardless of what level one might consider its speech, pornography still has value and is protected under the First Amendment.
Was the First Amendment created to protect this kind of speech? Does that matter here?
Yes, the First Amendment was created to protect unpopular speech that would likely be restricted. It matters in this case because pornography is protected and it's being targeted by HB 1181. It is meant to only restrict minors who have no right to pornography, but it also burdens adults' rights, which is why it violates the First Amendment and strict scrutiny must be applied.
Whose First Amendment rights are impacted by the Texas law? Is it minors, adults, or the platforms themselves?
HB 1181 will end up affecting more rights than originally intended due to the way it was written. It is overbroad and vague, affecting everyone's rights from minors to adults to the platforms. HB 1181 extends out to violate minors' rights. While pornography could be considered obscene, there's no official test for the court to go by, only suggestions that are constantly changing, such as the obscenity test in Roth v. United States and the obscenity test in Miller v. California. Even minors deserve the right to know about this information. While it might be understandable that pornography is restricted from a 5-year-old, it is not understandable that it is restricted from 16 and 17-year-olds. Minors who are on the older side are already presented as adults and are already dealing with adult activities such as graduating school, driving, and working. To stop minors in general from being able to access this kind of information completely violates their rights, regardless of how obscene one person might think it is. As said by Justice Thurgood Marshall and Stanley v. Georgia, it is now well established that the Constitution protects the right to receive information and ideas. Furthermore, adults' First Amendment rights are violated due to the heightened burden on them to access this information that the court has already said to be protected for them. The bill will require adults to put their personal information every time they want to access a website, with a third of the content being sexual. The bill also says that none of this information can be saved, so it creates a high burden for all adults to have to follow for them to access information that was already made available to them, violating their First Amendment rights. And lastly, the burden on commercial enterprises and hosts the burden on the commercial enterprises that host and create pornography material is also heightened because they now have to follow a bill that is vague with no structure and hope they are following the bill right, and if they aren't, they would have to face severe repercussions. Therefore, everyone's First Amendment rights are impacted by HB 1181, making it unconstitutional and must be looked at under strict scrutiny.
Why can or can't the government simply ban access to pornography online?
The government can't ban access to pornography online because pornography is protected speech, and banning it would violate the First Amendment. Pornography may be considered obscene for minors, but it is not for adults, and the Supreme Court's precedents reflect the importance of protecting the free speech of pornography. Particular in Denver Area Educational Telecommunications Consortium, Inc., BFCC, the court struck the 1992 Cable Act Section 10C unconstitutional, as it permitted cable operators to ban programs they found patently offensive or indecent, but held 10A constitutional, as it allowed cable operators to regulate patently offensive or indecent content. However, that does not mean that restriction is unconstitutional as long as it does not ban free speech. For the government still has a burden to show that HB 1181 is the least restrictive means to meet the government's interests. Banning access to pornography is not a constitutionally protected solution, and neither is restricting speech as HB 1181, that burdens speech expression when it is not the least restrictive means.
In what ways is the Texas law a content-based imposition on speech? In what ways is it not?
HB 1181 is a content-based imposition on speech because in order for the bill to be properly applied, the message of the speech has to be evaluated and discriminated against, which completely violates the First Amendment. The First Amendment has historically always protected speech and expression, so to try to make HB 1181 the exception would be unconstitutional and explain the need for strict scrutiny to be applied with its high bar.
Is including social media and search engines under the age verification requirement a reason to find this law unconstitutional?
No, it would not be a reason to find the law unconstitutional, because as the law is written now, it's under-inclusive. The government's interest is to protect minors from obscene content, but it does not regulate the most accessible form for minors to gain access, so it does not effectively meet this interest. However, HB 1181 is unconstitutional for several reasons, including being overbroad and vague. So while including search engines and social media in the law solves the problem of under-inclusivity, it still leaves other issues unresolved.
The law requires age verification when more than a third of the website's content is inappropriate for children. Would the law be more or less burdensome if the threshold was increased?
The law is already burdensome with the threshold being 1/3. To increase that threshold would increase the burden significantly. And because the bill affects pornography websites, minors, adults, and other websites with content that is considered sexual, it would significantly restrict their rights, which is unconstitutional.
Ashcroft v. ACLU applied strict scrutiny to a law that burdened adults' access to online speech, not the rational basis test. Why would the court not apply the same standard here?
The court should apply strict scrutiny, just as Ashcroft v. ACLU applied. COPA and HB 1181 are very similar laws in terms of content and flaws. COPA fined knowingly posting by means of the World Wide Web content that is harmful to minors and had a provision that allowed websites a defense against the fee if they placed safeguards in the form of age verification methods that showed an intent of protecting minors from the content. HB 1181 outright requires sites to place an age verification system. The only noticeable difference is that COPA is a criminal statute and HB 1181 is a civil statute. And while it has been recognized that criminal statutes chill speech more significantly than civil statutes, HB 1181 has multiple fees on sites and adults that creates a burden on speech. COPA was a content-based statute that burdened adults' rights, so the court accurately applied the most stringent level of scrutiny, and that precedent should be followed when reviewing HB 1181's constitutionality.
Ashcroft v. ACLU identified that content moderation through filtering settings was a less restrictive means of protecting minors online. Has that proven true in this time since Ashcroft?
Filtering settings is a least restrictive means, and the court should apply it like they did in Ashcroft v. ACLU. It worked in Ashcroft, so the court should be compelled to use it in today's case. In addition to filtering settings done by pornography websites, there are parental controls that would also provide a lesser restrictive means, meaning that the bill HB 1181 would not pass strict scrutiny and would be unconstitutional because it infringes upon more rights than necessary.
If the court were to find that the Texas law burdens the First Amendment rights of adults, does that mean petitioner wins?
Yes, it does. HB 1181 burdens adults' rights, and while the Supreme Court has allowed for free speech to be restricted in order to further compelling government interest, HB 1181 holds adults to the same restrictions as minors without furthering this interest. HB 1181 is an ineffective means of regulating minors' access to obscene content, as minors could easily just use a VPN to avoid HB 1181's restrictions.
Adults concerned for their privacy may not access websites requiring age verification. Is that a sufficient reason for striking this law down?
Yes, it is a sufficient reason. In Ashcroft v. ACLU, the court realized that the law in that case scared people into restricting their First Amendment rights to freedom of speech, which was enough for the court to say that it wasn't the least restrictive means to meet that interest. Similarly to today's case, the idea that people have to put in their personal information on the internet, where regardless of what the bill says, will most likely stay there, scares people into restricting their First Amendment rights to protect their privacy. Therefore, the privacy concern that comes along with the age verification requirement is enough to strike it down.
If the court finds that the law requires examination under strict scrutiny, does that mean the petitioner wins?
Yes, because HB 1181 cannot survive strict scrutiny. It is not narrowly tailored or the least restrictive means to achieve the government's interest. HB 1181 is vague in its identification provision, the government's proposed solution to minors' easy access to obscene content. It does not define what a commercially reasonable method to verify age is and leaves doubt as to what age verification methods platforms can implement. It is not the least restrictive means, as there are other less burdensome alternatives available, such as parental controls and the filtering software approved in Ashcroft v. ACLU.
Are the privacy concerns presented by online age verification similar to the privacy concerns required to access age-restricted purchases in a traditional brick-and-mortar store?
Yes, however, the privacy concern in this case are higher because once someone puts their information on the internet, it stays there forever, regardless of what that information is and regardless of what the bill says. The people using the websites are being attacked by the bill. The people using the websites that are being attacked by the bill have a right to privacy, even though HB 1181 requires none of their personal information to be saved, ever. It is the internet and can never be guaranteed.
In the years since Ginsburg v. New York have increased technology capacities increased or decreased the privacy concerns associated with age verification processes?
Technology capacities have increased privacy concerns with age verification processes. Anything you put on the internet can never be permanently deleted. In Ginsburg v. New York, the age verification process was just handing an ID to the store clerk. But when you provide an ID online, you're putting it on the internet and allowing it to be stored. It would be the same as if the store clerk kept a copy of your identification. The lower court may assert that the prohibition of retention and the fee attached if the provision is violated is enough to alleviate privacy concerns, but the law cannot prevent an unchangeable risk that will always be presented when placing your information on the internet. The burden on adults may not have been as high if it was only targeting paying customers who already input their credit card information, but it is also targeting more casual consumers who only engage in the free content of the platform, who now risk their personal information being stored.
Online access to harmful materials presents unique obstacles to parents trying to protect their kids. If this law is found to be unconstitutional, what else can Texas do to protect minors accessing online material?
Texas can provide guidelines instead that would help achieve the same goal just over a longer period of time and significantly less burdensome on First Amendment rights. By creating guidelines, it would shift the burden simply to commercial enterprises and allow them to follow the guidelines, and if they don't, it'd be solely on the commercial enterprises that would be affected by the bill.